All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Scott Ford. Scott, welcome. So awesome to have you with us today.
Hey, Kevin, another day here. So glad to be with you, and thanks for having me.
You bet. You bet. I want to give a shout out to Rich Christensen because he was the one that connected you and I. And after Rich and I did an interview, gosh, it's been a little while back now. I interviewed Rich for the podcast, and he was like, "Kev, you have absolutely got to interview Scott for the podcast as well." And I'll tell you, Rich and I, man, I'm trying to think. Rich and I go way back. I originally got introduced to Rich by my friend Garrett Gunderson, who Garrett and Rich are good friends. And that would have been probably back in I want to say 2008, so like 15 years ago. And
Well,
and Rich, I remember he had recently authored a book at that point, and then I ended up doing an event a couple of years later at my place right here in Washington State, and Rich flew out here for that as well. And Rich is one of those guys that that relationship means a lot. And when he told me you got to talk with Scott, that just carried so much weight and is such a testament to the power of relationships right there. And so, Rich, if you're listening to this, thank you very much. And with that, Scott, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just kind of turn it over to you and have you share just a little bit about. I want people to get a good understanding of who you are and the work you do. So if you could share what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do, and even a little bit of background on how you got into doing what you do and stuff.
yeah, right. There's a lot there, Kevin. I'll give it a shot and steer me, because I may get off track. Pull me back in. I'll just start with saying, you just mentioned two brothers of mine, right? And Rich and I are dear friends, and he's like a soul brother to me. And I was introduced to him by Garrett. So it's funny how these
small world
connect. Yeah, super close to them. And so no accidents. Here I am. So yeah, I guess my story. And so I'm in wealth management is what I would say. And that's just a big term, blah, in some ways. But that's what I've done for 30 years, Kevin, and some backstory on it. So was raised in a Baptist preacher's home, youngest of 5, grew up, I guess normal life, you would call it. It looks normal when you're swimming in the water, right? So we'll call it normal because it's what I knew. And there was, many events that leave marks on us. One for me was coming home from middle school, backpack on, trekking up the steps, and I see mom at the dining room table crying. Well, that wasn't normal. I saw mom cry maybe 2 to 3 times my entire life. Wow. So this is one of those, what's going on?
Sure.
So I go back to my bedroom, which is close to the dining room table, and I'm kind of doing my homework, but sort of listening in. And I put the puzzle together either that day or within weeks that it was financial. And what happened was they got in financial trouble and were filing for bankruptcy. And mom felt out of control. Dad was a bit of though Baptist preacher, he never took a salary. So he was always doing some entrepreneurial something. He wasn't always that good at it, clearly, with the bankruptcy thing coming. And it left an indelible mark on me.
Yeah.
So I can remember later in life, I think junior, senior, I didn't do a term paper. It was supposed to be written. Well, it just wasn't my thing. And I didn't do it. And so the teacher, kudos to her, said, would you do it orally? And I said, sure. And it was on, motivation and goals and how we can, get what we want in life. And so there's patterns here. So coming out of school, then I ended up in wealth management. I started in insurance and then quickly realized these business owners that I was working with in insurance, they were great at their trade, but they sucked at money and putting it all together, and they weren't trained at it. And they were trying to do the CPA thing, contact the attorney, contact the insurance, the investment contact. And I'm like, what if we could like do that for them? So I've never worked for anyone. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I started in magic in middle school. It's a conversation for another day, maybe. And so created Cornerstone to really focus on being a family office for these entrepreneurs and business owners. And I founded that in 1996, and I've never looked back. And so, why? Well, I gave a little bit of that story, right? Money was a pain point and some confusion for my family. And I was like, why? It affected their quality of life and, what they were able to do and not do. And I was like, it shouldn't be that complicated. And so I've been on this quest ever since, Kevin, to make money simple.
Yeah.
And that's why.
Okay.
So that people can fully live and do that today instead of what the industry and the world teaches us, which is someday, one day, maybe 50 years from now, you're going to have a bunch of money and you're going to have a great life. I'm like, what about today? What can we do today? And how do we simplify it so that people can?
Yeah. So because so you could serve all kinds of people with that. Who is your favorite and most rewarding kind of person to serve with what you've learned in all of this?
This may show self-serving, right, from my part, but I would say, so we have a lot of retirees and pre-retirees and business owners. Okay. My favorite they're a lot like me. They're business owners. They're first generation business owners. They've built it kind of with a team, and they've done it about 20, 25 years. And they're at this point where they're like, now, yes, let's keep doing this. And can I make an even bigger impact and focus on healing work for themselves and their families and such? And so what I would tell you would be business owners, typically in business 20 to 25 years, okay, typically have revenue of 5 to 500 million. It's broad, but they're mature companies, in other words. Yep. And they're looking for someone to simplify their life because they're big enough to need a family office, but they're not big enough to have one. They don't want to do the financial stuff. And they're just looking for someone that has the capability to do that, and then allow them to focus on what they're most gifted at, to include creating contribution and significance at this point, because they've kind of checked the financial box. So that's what I would tell you would be the sweet spot for who we serve best. Okay. Very good. Very good. So, so now that we've got a little bit of an idea of who you are, Scott, and what inspires you to do the work that you do and how you got into this in the first place, I want to switch gears here, and I'm going to ask the question that I normally ask of every guest you will be the 222nd person that I've interviewed for this podcast. And I'm just going to say right now, since launching this podcast a little over 2 years ago, this has been the most rewarding thing I've done in my 27 years as an entrepreneur, is hosting this podcast. And it's having conversations like these that make an impact. And so I'm going to ask you this question, and then we're just going to see where this conversation goes. And I can assure you it's going to be really cool. So have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Scott, I'm just really excited to dig into this with you a little bit and hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships. Yeah, for sure. Let's go. What I would say is, first of all, it's kind of cool. 222 seems like a special number here for this podcast, so we'll see. And I would say relationships and introductions and people that I have bumped to along the way, it's too many to honestly name, Kevin. Sure. So I just go with intuition, right? And what comes up for me is initially when I was 19, I mentioned in high school doing my term paper orally, which was better for me than written. And it was on motivation and goals. And so I bumped into Tony Robbins in that time frame, and his, little tapes back in the day when I was doing insurance and traveling to Western Maryland, which was a 2-hour drive one way, a 2-hour drive back, did it for years. I would listen to Tony Robbins tapes. And so not a personal in-person mentor, but that guy has had a big impact on my direction and thinking in life. So I got to call it out. Another would be a dear friend and who I would call a mentor. And he laughed when I said that, because his name is Art Staymates. And Art lived in Hagerstown, Maryland. It's how I met him. And Art was a World War II veteran that hit the beach in Normandy, had served as one of the lead guards at the Nuremberg trials, and amazing stories, and amazing human being. And so when I would talk to Art, and he was like, Scott, I'm not your mentor, you're mine. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'll explain. It's not the financial business success. I'm like, you know how to love life and people like no one I've ever seen, like ever. And he's like, Scott, when you're crawling around and just trying to get warm because you're wet and you can't for months, and you're eating grubs, and now we're sitting here in this air conditioned or heated place, how do you not love life and people? So my point is, wow, what a mentor this guy was to me. He died at like 92 years of age, lived a full life, and he just showed what life is, right? It's not all the stuff. It's not all the businesses. It's relationships and really connecting with people. This guy did this, right? And so when he passed at 92, place was full. How many 92-year-olds have, a full funeral and viewing, right? So it just was a testament to his genuine love of people and life to his last days, right? So that's another example of someone who's left an indelible mark on me on my journey. Yeah, they're two that come to mind. And then the others are close relationships of my parents, right? And so we all have our stuff to work through, and so there's good and bad to all. Mom taught me hard work. Dad taught me entrepreneurship and business ownership, which is important. My wife Angie has taught me the depths of relationship. It's not all love and light. There's all kinds of different things to experience here. Embrace it all. And then my kids have been some of my biggest teachers, right? They've done their own work and continue to. I have grandkids now, so they're teaching me things. And so there's some of my teachers in relationship that I would share at this point. So many more, man. I could take the rest of the day on relationships and just say has molded who I am.
Yeah. So you and I have such a similar view on relationships and the value of relationships. We both place a really high value on relationships. And if and you've mentioned a number of people here, you mentioned listening to Tony Robbins tapes when you were much younger. You mentioned Art, your parents, your wife, your own kids and grandkids. And you've also alluded to there's a whole lot of other people, of course. I mean, no surprise there, that have been very impactful on you, on your personal life, on your business over the years. So I love asking this question. So if you look at the relationships that you've had over the years, I want you to kind of think of, I'm sure you can give tons of examples of this. I want to challenge you to just focus on one, and whatever comes top of mind for you. But if you look at back on the relationships you've had over the years, and where you have, as a result of that, been able to make a really big, substantial impact in the world, and hands down, that would have never happened without your relationship with whoever that was. I would love to hear about an experience like that.
Where just one example,
one example,
right, of me making a connection with relationships that made an impact in someone's life.
Or yeah, whatever that big impact is, however you would define that, where you look back on that and go, you know what, wow, that was huge, and that would have never happened if not for my relationship with whoever that was.
Yeah,
I know
this one's tricky. This one's tricky, Kevin, because I have many that come to mind. Yet I'm wanting to honor what your question was, which was the most impactful. So this is tricky also because of the tenderness of it.
Yeah.
So this is what I would say. I'm going to say for my kids, but I have two. We have two, and a healing ceremonial modality that they both asked me about and participated in that changed their life.
Okay. So do you want to go into any more detail than that?
I would simply say a spiritual experience that changed them as human beings, that changed our relationship as father and child, and changed their relationship with the world and the creator. I don't know if I can say bigger than that. And I can say that that's what happened.
Yeah, that's powerful. You know, as you're sharing that, Scott, I am thinking back about 6, 7 years ago to an experience that I had with one of my 6 children, well, 7 children. But I had this experience with one of them that definitely impacted the 2 of us in that moment, but then has impacted all the rest of the kids too and stuff. And who knows how many countless other people as a result of that. So, man, I'm just that's powerful stuff right there.
It's as big as it gets for me, Kevin. And I can think of, other people, the mentor and various things. There's nothing bigger than your own kids. Having that kind of experience and having that kind of change, and that I could have any part of it, which I don't take honestly credit. It just came to mind. I did make the introduction, right? So I'll just leave it at that. They did the work. They said yes. So they get the credit. I'm just going to say nothing more important to me.
Yeah. That's powerful. I know any of our listeners who have kids, who are parents, that's going to register. That's going to land with them. That's going to land with them. And there's 2 really cool things about being able to host this podcast. It's being able to interview people like yourself and hear your stories and give you the opportunity to share your stories and your experiences around this topic of relationships. And then also for the listeners who are also, they too, they're entrepreneurs, they're founders, they're CEOs. And after a little over 2 years of hosting this, we've got an amazing group of entrepreneurs and I've got to get a lot of feedback from even entrepreneurs who I've known for years and who have listened to this podcast and reached out to me and been like, Kev, I didn't used to place as high of a value on relationships as you do, but since watching you and listening to your podcast, that's changed for me. And that just makes me feel good, because that's a big piece of this. Is I want to inspire these entrepreneurs, not tell them you need to do this, but just through these conversations, they come to their own conclusion that, like, man, you know what? I want to place, not I need to, not I should, but I want to place a more intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in my life. And that's what this is all about in my mind. you know.
Yeah.
And I want to
Yeah.
just thank you for this today, right here, you know. And
You're welcome, Kevin. I would just, and I would add, my frame on life. So our process and podcast is the way to wealth, and it's the proprietary financial wealth management process that developed in the early 2000s. Well, the way is living in the present moment and living life. So the premise of that to me is four things that I do my best to live by, and it's health, wealth, wisdom, and happiness. And health, wealth, and wisdom came from Benjamin Franklin, right? And I just added to it. So there's three things for each. So for health, for me, is physical, mental, spiritual. And then wealth is really about being financially independent and economically independent, financially free, which that's what I do for a living. And then below that is recognizing you have enough. And then below that is really love, because that's the ultimate wealth in my mind. And then wisdom. Wisdom to me is three things: lifelong learning, um, you know, having lots of experiences create wisdom, and living in the present moment. So that's wisdom. And then lastly, and this is what Franklin didn't talk about, is happiness. And to me, happiness comes from being grateful.
mhm.
Like, what do we like? That's the start of it. And then having a dream or purpose that we're contributing to. And one of yours is this podcast, but that's what makes us happy. And then lastly, and this is all intentional. So I said health, bottom spiritual. I said wealth, bottoms love. I said wealth, living in the present moment. And I say bottom, it's the depth of the iceberg. It's the real health, wealth, wisdom. And then happiness, the bottom of the iceberg, is relationships.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. That's the juice. If you want to be happy, it's relationships to
Yeah.
yourself, to your tribe and family, or to your family and that, and then to your tribe, and then your community. So it lines up, Kevin, what you're doing with exactly what I believe and do my best to live, and what people really want. Sometimes they come because, give me more money, Scott. Well, I can help with that. It's what we do for a living, but that's up here at the top of the iceberg.
Yeah.
What you really want is to be loved and seen, and to be spiritually connected, and to live in the present moment, not the past and the future, and to have healthy relationships that you're engaged and connected with.
Yes. Yes. 100%. 100%. Well, I would certainly be remiss because I know people listening to this are going to be like, man, Kev, I really resonate with what Scott shared. And I love Scott and the way he shows up. So how can people find more about the work that you guys are doing? You got a website or resources they can check out if they feel inclined to do that?
Yeah, easiest way, Kevin is our website, which is The Way to Wealth, and it's
Okay.
The Way, THEWAY, the number 2,
Okay.
and then wealth spelled out.com. So The Way to Wealth with the number 2.com. That's the podcast. That's where I'll do blogs and different videos and such about what I'm up to. Easiest way for people to connect and find more information, for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. And before I just want to leave it open for if there's anything that you just feel compelled to share before we call it a wrap right here.
The only additional thing I'll say about relationships is really just showing up to serve.
Yeah.
I've heard it said that every moment presents itself for us to lift it, make it a little better. And if we can show up, like, to me, this whole game is about healing. And until we do our own work, it's tough to show up in relationship without taking. And in doing our own work, I've heard it called the I, we model, which is part of what I talk about, doing our own work at the I level. Then we can show up at the we level in relationships without taking and being able to give. And then at the all level, which talks about doing something philanthropically to the world and our communities. We can only do that first by doing our own work and our own healing work.
Yeah. Amen. Scott, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. And I am so excited to get this interview out and to share it with other entrepreneurs because I know how impactful it's going to be. So thank you again. Really appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Kevin.